Have we heard anything more about what can we expect in the report and also when the report would be published?
Well, at the moment, the best bet on when the report will be published is on Tuesday, although that very much has been a movable feast. And it does seem to be the case that Sue Gray has an ever expanding remit. So potentially we could see it delayed again. In terms of what will be in that report, what it will actually look like, it seems to be the case, and certainly the Times reports today, that this report is going to be fairly broad brush. Don't expect a list of names, for example. Don't expect a blow by blow breakdown of each of those parties that took place. What we see in public will be a shortened version of that report. But increasingly, there is a sense of nerves in Downing Street that this report will be pretty tricky for Boris Johnson. Any previous reports that the report could be expected to be a whitewash are very much out of the window, I would say. It looks like this is going to be a pretty tough reading for Johnson.
There was reports, I think, yesterday in the Times of another email being unearthed by Sue Gray, an email alerting officials that that party, the now infamous party arranged by the Prime Minister's PPS, the advice of sort of being, are we sure we want to do this? And isn't this breaking the rules? And that could be a serious bit of evidence for the Prime Minister, shouldn't it?
It really could, although the details of this are very specific. So it seems to be the case that Sue Gray has unearthed this email from an official within the Prime Minister's inner circle to Martin Reynolds, the sender of the now infamous email, saying, essentially, as you say, are you sure that we should go ahead with this? Now, Robert Peston from ITV is in contact with this official and says that this official cannot recall whether or not they spoke to Boris Johnson about this. So again, slightly out of Boris Johnson's circle. Dominic Cummings, of course, the Prime Minister's former chief advisor, he says something similar. He says that Boris Johnson was warned. That's an allegation also repeated in the Sunday Times last weekend, also repeated by Sky News, by The Guardian. All of these people have sources inside Downing Street who tell them that. That is the allegation that could be really tricky for Johnson because, of course, he is giving the impression that he did not know anything about this party and he didn't realise that it was a problem at the time.
But Charlotte, isn't this sort of what we expect to happen, that there is going to be what some people might call the plausible deniability, that yes, the Prime Minister didn't send the email, the emails questioning the party didn't go directly to the Prime Minister. Therefore, the Prime Minister has, albeit a narrow path to escape from blame, if you like, whatever the Sue Gray report comes up with, unless there is direct evidence that the Prime Minister was warned and then decided to proceed, then surely the Prime Minister doesn't have, unless there's new revelation, surely the Prime Minister doesn't have that much to worry about, other than already a lot of the stuff that he has to worry about right now, which is a considerable amount.
Well, I would say this could develop into a bit of a he said situation.
That's right, yeah.
We know that Dominic Cummings is prepared to talk under oath to Sue Gray. I suspect other civil servants will be willing to do the same. But as you say, there could be a narrow path here for Boris Johnson. He says what he saw did not strike him as a party. If there's no paper trail of someone telling him it is a party, then yes, there is a way through. But for the fact that he also has to convince his MPs. And if they do not find that excuse plausible, if what Sue Gray produces does not seem to give Boris Johnson wiggle room, even if in a court of law it would do, then that will cause real problems for him. I would say he's very much not out of the woods.
What was your feeling this week? Because we saw the beginning of the week, there was a sort of, the MPs had come back from their constituencies where they were inundated with emails, very upset constituents, very upset Tory voters as well about the conduct of the Prime Minister. Monday was quite a febrile atmosphere in Parliament. Tuesday it kept getting worse. But then something happened at PMQs. We had, an unprecedented, it has happened before, but a very rare phenomenon of a Conservative MP crossing the House and joining Labour. But then it seemed that the momentum of this move to oust the Prime Minister sort of slowed down. Have you understood why that is?
There are a number of factors at play here. Firstly, the Prime Minister had a better than expected performance at Prime Minister's Questions. Last week, Prime Minister's Questions was universally considered to be pretty weak from the PM. It was pretty quiet. He seemed to be tangled in knots, but the general consensus in Parliament was he did better this week. Also, as well, a lot of MPs were talking about the interview that Boris Johnson did the day before with Beth Rigby, in which he really didn't seem to be up to scratch in many of their eyes. Well, he had a bit of a return to form on Wednesday, and that certainly won round a few waverers. Then Christian Wakeford, that MP who defected to Labour, also plays a key role here. A lot of MPs who were wavering looked at that and thought, you know what, that's not something I want to be involved with. And it slightly united them all around a common enemy and made them circle the wagon. So that does seem to have bought Boris Johnson a bit of time. It's interesting, actually, speaking to Labour Party officials about that. You say to them, well, isn't that an error? Didn't you make a mistake there? You saved Boris Johnson in a way by bringing over your defector. And they will tell you no, they're very happy for Boris Johnson to remain in place because, of course, for as long as he does, the Conservative Party will remain at war with itself, and all of these allegations made about parties will remain evidence. Whereas, of course, if Boris Johnson were to go, it wouldn't quite be a clean slate, but it would certainly move the conversation on.
Let's talk a little bit about the blackmailing row. William Ragg yesterday made a statement which alluded to the fact that a lot of MPs have been cornered, shall we say, by whips, the chief whip and other whips, and, well, for want of a better word, threatened and told that if they do not offer their support and vote with the government on various issues, funding will be withdrawn from their constituents. What do we know so far? We've had blanket sort of disbelief, let's put it this way, from senior Conservative members. But what do we know so far about those practices?
Well, we don't really know a huge amount. And the reason for that is all of this goes on behind closed doors. So I have heard for a long time from various different MPs about the tactics that government and opposition, in some cases whips, use to keep them on side. None of these allegations really are a surprise to me. I know certainly that MPs have before felt bullied, have felt harassed. I've never heard anyone say that they were blackmailed, but I imagine if you were being blackmailed, you probably wouldn't tell a journalist all about it, because that would then lead to questions of what exactly it was in your private life that allow you to be in that position. But I think there are two stories here, really. First is about general intimidation tactics, bad HR, bad workplace policy, and also the intimidation of elected members, which is something we probably wouldn't want to see in a functioning democratic system. And then there's this other story, which is about use of public funds. And I think that one is much more interesting and probably more new than the other half of this. That is the question of whether Tory whips said to MPs, if you don't vote for us, you will not get money for your new school, your new hospital, XYZ, fill in the blanks for whatever they want. That's what Christian Wakeford alleges. That's what MPs have alleged to me in private as well. And this would be a real challenge for the government, because public money, our money, is not meant to be allocated in that way. There are systems in place, there are checks and balances to ensure that money is allocated according to need, according to civil servants, algorithms, huge amounts of time and effort put into predicting where this money should go. It should not be allocated on the basis of how an MP is voting. So that is probably the more interesting allegation here, I think, and the more damaging one for the government.
Is this really the first time that we hear of something like that? I mean, I remember reading it in books of MPs who talk about, memoirs, that sort of thing goes on. That's part, if you like, and I hate to use a cliche, part of politics. That's how you get people to fall in line in political parties. That's how you keep people and their loyalties. And as you said, it's going to be very difficult to prove, although Stephen Swinford in today's paper has been talking about some of the rebel MPs, or the ones that have been talking about being strong-armed, if you like, by whips, have got a recorded conversation with the chief whip and text messages as receipts. Do you think we're likely to see those being leaked to the press?
I don't think we'll see those leaks to the press. I think that's probably a shot across the bows from some of these backbench MPs to the whip's office, just to indicate that they are fighting back and to set some hairs running within Downing Street and the whip's office as well. You're right. In large part, this is pretty much standard business for Westminster. Although, if you speak to people in the whip's office, they will tell you, no, we don't do this type of thing. We very much are an HR department. We are lovely and fluffy, and MPs can come to us with their problems just to get out their side of the story as well. This money allegation, I think, is the bit that looks a bit different to me. I have heard MPs talk about this before, but really only in the last year or so. There was some talk about it around the Owen Paterson debate and the encouragement of MPs to vote with the government on that one. But this one does seem to be relatively new. And clearly, as well, what is also new is the willingness of MPs to talk about this in public. We've got a new generation of politicians who are not business as usual politicians. They did not learn the rules of the game from the old boys club. They are political outsiders in many cases. They didn't arrive in Parliament and have the opportunity to be trained in the rules of the game by the grandees, because they all went off back to their constituencies because the coronavirus pandemic hit. And so I think we could be seeing a bit of a shift in the tactics that can be used if this is going to happen when the old game is played.
Let's talk about the Transport Secretary. Grant Shapps. We spoke earlier with Hugo Rifkind, who drew our attention to a public announcement video that is put out on Twitter. Ironically, as Hugo pointed out, the subject of the public announcement video was to ban public announcements on trains. But let's have a little listen to Grant Shapps and the video that he's put out on his Twitter feed.
Service update from the control room. There is currently a good service running on the line.
If you travel by train, you've probably heard some of these messages, repeated over and over. Do we really need to be told to put our newspapers in the bin, or that the weather outside is inclement? Passengers just need to be treated as grown-ups and be able to use their common sense, because train travel should be a chance to relax, read a book, maybe catch up on some work, or even take a nap. So we've reviewed the messages that are played on the tannoy system, and where they add nothing but noise and irritation, we're removing them. All part of the William Shapps plan to improve our railways.
I have to repeat that was genuinely Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary. This is not a spoof. This is a video that has come out of a government minister, Secretary of State no less, on his Twitter feed.
I found that rather charming. It's quite nice. It rather reminded me of Grant Shapps' role towards the end of the first lockdown, when you had the Barnard Castle debacle, the government falling around his ears. And then every now and again, clearly because they had to have a government announcement at every press conference, Grant Shapps will come out and say, "Oh, I've got a bicycle upgrade scheme." And I remember one particularly tense press conference where everyone was asking him about the scandal of the day, and he very mournfully looked at the camera and said, "Doesn't anyone want to ask me about duelling the A42?"
Oh my God. The other thing that I'm sort of wondering about, and in the article that's been written out in the Times, does the government actually have the power to tell train companies to take away those messages? I mean, the companies run themselves. The companies evaluate what messages are useful to their passengers. Can the government really go in and go, "Yeah, stop playing those. People don't want to hear them"?
I mean, they could probably give advice, and of course, these companies do win tender from the government, so they
yes.
could put it as a condition for winning that tender process.
We're back to the Chief Whip story, aren't we? Fantastic. Well, look, Charlotte, before you go, looking forward to next week, we're thinking possibly Tuesday for the Sue Gray report. Do you think some people have suggested that one of the reasons we saw the slowdown in the efforts to remove the Prime Minister was because of the defection? People didn't like the image that set, so also gave them somebody else to focus their anger on, someone other than the Prime Minister. But there was suggestions that people are withholding what they've already decided to do, which is withdraw the support from the Prime Minister until they see the Sue Gray report. So when that report comes out, are you expecting some sort of shift within the Conservative Party?
I think we will see a shift. And the reason for that is not so much because Conservative MPs are expecting some key detail in the Sue Gray report, which will either exonerate the Prime Minister or condemn him, but rather because I'm waiting for Sue Gray has become something of a holding line. It's an easy way to get people like you and me or your constituents off your back and say, "Look, I'm not passing judgment yet. Leave me alone. Come back to me later." Well, what happens when that lifeline is taken away? It's very unlikely that that report will lead MPs to be able to point to something concrete that they say, "Excellent, all is well now." And it puts them back in that tricky position. It puts them back at a decision point, whereas thus far they have really lent on this report as a means to avoid making a decision.
Okay. Charlotte, as always, thank you so much for your time. Charlotte Ivers there, our political correspondent. You can read more from the likes of Charlotte in the Times and the Sunday Times. So why not pick up a copy of the paper today or get yourself a digital subscription? Of course, remember, we're offering you the first month absolutely free.